who's going to want to sign up for that? But then the second thought I had was, man, I have to preach on that gospel with my family and my kids and my wife sitting right there. These are hard, uncomfortable words. Did you notice, and were you squirming in your seats too? Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. These are not easy words, are they? Actually, it gets even more confusing because Jesus' words here in this gospel directly contradict what we just heard in that first reading from a different part of the Bible. Moses, they are diametric opposites. Moses says, live right and you'll get lots of stuff. Jesus says, you can't live if you have lots of stuff. Moses says, choose life. Jesus says, come on, let's go die. This is when I am particularly grateful for being Lutheran. Because as Lutherans, we know that we can face up to the fact that the Bible contradicts itself. It comes from different perspectives and from different purposes, and in there are contradictions, but we also know that what the Bible does for us is it introduces us to Jesus. It's God's love letter. It is the record of God at work in people's lives over centuries and millennia. And as Lutherans, we know it's not the Bible that we worship. We worship Jesus. It's not the Bible that we follow or even that we believe in. We believe in and follow Jesus because Jesus is the one that saves us. And so as Lutherans, it allows us to sit with those contradictions and be okay. But these are still hard words. Now, what do we do with hard words like this when Jesus is saying them to us? Well, there seem to be two common approaches to these words. The first is to turn them into metaphor. And so we can do that in a lot of ways. Well, a really popular one, I've preached this before, is to say in the first century, in the language that Jesus was speaking, because we know Jesus was not speaking English, and so in the words that got translated to us as hate, in the first century among Jews, it did not have the same sort of gut reaction and sort of emotional content that we think of when we use the word hate. And so for them, they would have heard something more like put in second place. Don't let family, wife, children, parents, etc. be first place, but when it comes to a decision, choose God. Put Jesus first in all things. And that makes for a pretty good sermon. The second way that we often can approach hard words like this from Jesus is to read them literally. And then following Jesus becomes a cult, which, after all, is what people have suspected of us Lutherans for a long time with our obsessions about coffee and Jell-O. But this time we got to build a compound. We have to put up walls. We have to separate ourselves from everything. And it gets dangerous. And is that really what Jesus means? That to follow him, we have to join the cult and drink the Kool-Aid? This week I started hearing these words in a different way, and I started to wonder, what if Jesus is not just giving the world's worst set of prerequisites that I can imagine being on any syllabus, a sort of checklist, but what if instead of being prescriptive, Jesus is being descriptive? Could it be That what Jesus means here, or one of the ways we can hear this, is to say, I wonder if the gift that Jesus is offering us is worth all of that. Could the gift that Jesus is offering us have that kind of effect on us that might set us free from all the things that stuff Jesus is talking about often mean for us? What if this is not prescriptive, a checklist, but descriptive? This is what happens. And we start by remembering, as Pastor and I talk about a lot when we're up here, it is important for us always to remember who's talking and where he's heading. Because Jesus is talking to us from his way to the cross, to the worst that we had come up with at the time to do to a person, to be branded as a criminal and a traitor, publicly humiliated. And Jesus is going willingly to that darkest valley we've managed to come up with so far to take our place. He is taking on himself all the worst that life in this world can mean. And what he offers us is he says, I'll take your place. Why don't you take mine? It's ludicrous. It is ridiculous that Jesus thinks, let's swap lives is an even trade. Because he takes all of the abuse and the bad things that happen in life into those darkest valleys and says, why don't you have mine? Because his life belongs in heaven, remember. His life here on earth had all of the beauty and the joy and the qualities of heaven here today. And he says, why don't you have that? It'll be a free and fair swap. Why don't you live my life? And I'll die in your place. A free swap. But I have this suspicion that as we explore and learn what it means when we are baptized and we are given that swap, that we are living Jesus' life in the world, something happens to us. I have this suspicion that we maybe start to hear and see things a little bit differently, because the truth is there are a lot of voices around us that want to tell us what matters. Have you noticed this? They want to tell us what we have to do to matter. And they want us to believe that in order to be worthy and important and all of those things, we have to believe what they say. Buy what they're selling. We have to hate the people they do. Be afraid of the people they tell us to. That's the only way we can be whole and safe. There are a lot of voices that want to tell us who we are. And as we discover and explore together that we are living Jesus' life, those words, they start to sound different, don't they? We start to hear how thin they really are. Those voices that tell you that your worth is based on what's in your bank account, that your value is because of what you do, that the only solution to the world is to be afraid of the right people, we can hear how thin those really are, can't we? Because this free gift Jesus has given us, this free gift that costs us our lives, because it is a trade. We are living Jesus' life in the world. This free gift sets us free. We know who we are. beloved of heaven, child of the Most High God. We are beloved enough for Jesus to die in our place. That's you. When we know who we are, all those other voices start to fade away because we don't need them. We can see through them, can't we? And we discover we are free. Even free of all those things that Jesus names that we so often think tell us who we are. You gave me a gift this summer. You gave me the privilege of attending and worshiping in the Nikolaikirche in Leipzig, Germany. It is an 800-year-old church in downtown Leipzig, which is in former East Germany. It is beautiful. It is a stunningly beautiful church, and that is one of the gifts that you gave me this summer. The Nikolaikirche, back in the 1970s, under East German rule, started hosting annual peace prayer weeks, where they would, for a week, they would gather to pray and to worship because they were increasingly concerned about the arms race, what they saw the East German government doing to the environment, how the abuses were escalating. They were every week through the 70s. By the 80s, they were, or every year in the 70s. By the 80s, they were every week. Every Monday night, they gathered for prayer. There were only a few people, except that the abuses and the actions of the government got increasingly worse, and by the end of the 80s, there were more and more people there until in 1989, on October 2nd, 1989, people gathered there to pray, to worship, to hear the words of Jesus, and then they tried to take their prayers to the streets. And they were met by the police with batons and attack dogs. They were arrested and thrown into prisons that no one ever comes back from. The next week, on October 9th, people started arriving in the morning. The prayers were that night, and people started showing up in the morning. By that evening, the place was full and it was seething as people were praying and arguing, what do we do? They did not know what would be waiting for them on the other side of those church doors when they left. Would the police be back, and would it be worse this time? The sermons, and yes, I said plural, there were at least 3 that night. The sermons called people and reminded them of the words of Jesus, things like the Beatitudes, reminded people that Jesus never prescribed violence as a solution to anything, calling people to follow Jesus and reminding them. By the end of the service, not knowing what was awaiting them outside, they went out those doors expecting police. I found 10,000 people with candles, waiting to draw them in and embrace them. Together, they took their prayers to the street, to the ring road which goes around the downtown. Their numbers growing, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, praying, singing, chanting, walking there. This is East Germany. Public protest doesn't happen, did not happen. 70,000 people marching on that ring road, and as they came around, they came up to a police line. The police blocking the way. Police who just that day had been specially issued guns and ammunition with the expectation that they would shoot. The police, having received these pistols with the ammunition, several of them went back to their bunks and wept because they knew that it was their sisters and their daughters and their brothers who were marching. And they knew what was expected of them. 70,000 singing, chanting, praying people carrying candles came up to this police line that had been given orders to shoot. And the police gave way. The police gave way and stepped back. They continued on the way, all the way around to the ring, to the headquarters of the secret police, where they were barricaded inside with those shields and batons. They were ready and armored, and people came and put candles on the steps at their feet. It should have been a bloodbath. It should have been a massacre. It was supposed to be. And no one died. Not one. Later, one of the police captains that were there in that line there were asked by a reporter, "What happened? Why didn't you shoot?" And this reporter, remembering this 30 years later, teared up as he reported. He said to me, "What should we do? They were our children." To me, that sounds like the freedom we have. Yes, the protesters taking their prayers to the street to help make the world as it ought to be, but especially those police officers. Given a command to shoot, they discovered freedom. Freedom to do what's right and to love the people God gave them. To me, that sounds like Jesus. It sounds like the gift we have when Jesus swapped places.